couple weeks ago, we covered the Duino Elegies by Rainer Maria Rilke, which are it's an interesting, it's a collection of poetry, but there's a darkness to it, because he's writing in the early part of the 20th century and contending with the darkness, the spiritual darkness that is modernity and the inability to know. So he's really talking about the glass darkly. And we were talking about this in the course, I said, I always read these elegies and I think of, being in a jar and seeing reality outside of the jar, but you can't touch it. But you could see, it's there. And or the presence of God, if it starts off, the first line of the elegies, if you don't know, it's probably the more powerful lines of 20th century poetry. Who, if I cried out, would hear me among the angels' hierarchies? And even if one of them pressed me suddenly against his heart, I would be consumed in that overwhelming existence. For beauty is nothing but the beginning of terror, which we still are just able to endure. And we are so awed because it serenely disdains to annihilate us. Every angel is terrifying. And that's, where do you go from there, right? And this is, I was so thinking of trauma. Trauma is not unknown to me. So, for instance, I don't want to get all weepy and therapy-like, but when I was 15 years old, my father, this was 1970s, in Detroit, which was not a great place to live in the 1970s. And my father, after years of unemployment, not just due to, economic circumstances, and slipped into alcoholism and then tried to commit suicide. And here, thank you, Freud, on my bed. And my mother was at work, and my sister called me to come, and she knew something was wrong, but she didn't know what to do. So she called me. I was at my friend's house, and this is before cell phones, right? So she was lucky to catch me. And I went home, and I found him. I remember tying tourniquets of green socks. Oh my gosh, I don't know what that means. Around his wrist, because he tried to cut his wrist, but he lived. It was he was a failed attempt, and he actually, after that, it took time, but he lived a life of value in love. He was always a loving person, but life breaks people, and it broke him, and I think he was probably also, speaking of trauma, dealing with the trauma of losing his own father at 15. So, that generational trauma came to me when I was 15, and I'm hoping I didn't screw my boys up when they were 15. But it didn't. And here's but wait, there's more.
Hi, this is Paul. Those of you following along on the Northwestuary videos know that the conference, if I'm sort of putting them in order and I'm putting these little pieces in to sort of add context, because just recordings of the plenary sessions do not in any way do justice to the power and the weight of this conference. And those of you following along know that before Michael Martin's speech comes Rafe Kelly's speech. And of course, Rafe, I posted it on Twitter, and Rafe was like, I don't know if I really thought through the fact that this was going to go out to the world. Well, fortunately, the number of you watching this on my channel is pretty small still for my channel. So people were very transparent. People were very personal in the conference, both in the estuary groups, which of course were not recorded, but even the plenary speakers on stage. And I'm already planning how I'm going to introduce this. I'm going to start with a little bit of the story from Michael Martin. Now, this is the second event that I made with Michael, and I love Michael. Michael is a great guy. When you do these events, these small events, we don't have a green room or anything like that, despite what the Corner Citizen does with his videos. We don't have a green room, and we sort of put them together on a shoestring, and both in Washington, D.C. and in Olympia, Washington, Michael and I got some time to spend together in the car. And it was great. It was absolutely great. I'm a father of 5 kids. He's a father of 9 kids. He talks about it. And is just a super guy, musician, incredible musician, poet, thinker. You know, he's done all kinds of things in his life, and this talk that he gave was so Michael Martin. I thought it was beautiful. And, you know, he starts out basically saying, you know, talking about, you know, how heavy the conference was, because after Nate had shared about his medical condition, and after Rafe had shared about the abuse that he suffered as a child, about the struggles in his marriage, and Michael comes in and we're thinking, oh, you know, and then he starts telling stories and it's like, it's not getting any better. But what's so beautiful is he hits the right note and he says, but that's because this is life in this world. And what they're talking about is so, so common. And it is. And part of the, you know, one of the best things out of Grim Grizz was television is a normalizing ray. And this normalizing ray has led so many of us to imagine that the kinds of sufferings that Rafe talked about, that Michael talked about, that Nate talked about, that all of us know, especially if you're in pastoral ministry, these kinds of sufferings are common. They are visited on many of us, if not almost all of us, and the truth is, none of us get out of this world alive. If you have the good fortune to grow old, you will watch your friends die. My mother is 86, and she's in great health, and she's clear as a bell. And in some ways, she's enjoying life as much as ever. She's been a widow now for 11 years. And she had a wonderful marriage with my father. So it's not that. But, you know, she says to me on this trip, she says, you know, one of the things about growing older is that you watch so many of the people around you, the people that you love, die. And she's 86 now, and she's in great health. So if she keeps, I mean, she's got a cousin who was blind and hit 100. And so if she keeps going, it keeps going. It's the age of decay. And then Michael also said something in his talk when he's talking about a girlfriend that one of his sons had broken up with, and she was on all kinds of psych meds. He talked about the fact that given all the trauma that he had been through in his young life, they certainly would have put him on all those psych meds. And he just shared how glad and happy he was that they didn't. Why? Because pain is an integral part. Pain is an integral part of our maturation. I just did the video I did talking about Peterson's talk with Dawkins. You know, one of Peterson's latest themes that he brings up again and again is how integral sacrifice is to maturation, even on a psychological level. Well, as a pastor, I see again and again that pain is integral to maturation. Now, pain is a difficult thing. If you read the Gospel of John, and you read John 15, it's really the parable of the vine. The Father prunes. He prunes and he prunes, and I've preached on this numerous times. If you take a look at, I've told this story too. We had a man in our church who, he's still there. In fact, he's very old now. But our home used to be a parsonage, and he just got in the habit of stopping by and doing a few things in the yard. And before we put in a swimming pool, we had a fruit tree. And he came by to prune it. And my wife and I are sitting there watching how much he's taken off this fruit tree, and we're thinking, what's going on? Well, he grew up in Ripon, where they grow almonds and walnuts and all sorts of fruits. And he knew, you want the tree to bear fruit, you got to prune it. And you can just go on the internet and take a look at how they prune grapevines. And Northern California is full of grapevines. Grapevines, vineyards are everywhere in Northern California right now. And when they prune them, they trim them way, way, way back. And you think, are you going to kill this poor plant? But he prunes us to make us fruitful. Because most of the time we're of no earthly good, living fat and happy. But the irony, of course, is that that's what we want for ourselves. That's what we want for our children. We want them fat and happy. So we do whatever we can for them. We privilege them in every way possible so that calamity won't befall them. We vaccinate them against rubella and German measles and polio, and we give them the best education we can afford, and we try to give them every opportunity, and we try to make sure that they have good friends and not bad friends, and we try to keep them away from drugs and tobacco and alcohol, and we do all these things to help protect our kids. And for the most part, it's a complete failure. It doesn't work. We pump them full of catechesis and theology. We give them Sunday school lessons. We fill their heads full of Bible verses. We do all of this. And, part of the great walking away from church that has happened in the last 30 years, and especially in the Christian Reformed Church, because I don't know any denomination that through the 20th century was more devoted to the catechesis and the education of their children than the Christian Reformed Church in North America. And yet they walk away, go astray, get into trouble, and suffer. The Bible says that God disciplines those he loves. And the Bible is very clear that discipline is painful. And I've said this before too on my videos, that when I meet a truly exceptional Christian, a truly exceptional saint, they always come with a background of pain. They have always suffered. As a pastor, a big part of my job is to relieve suffering. I was out here in Massachusetts and bumped into someone that I knew when I was young, because we'd always come up here when we were young. And he contacted my mother because it's the only number he had. And he just needed to unburden his soul, and he hadn't gotten familiar with the local pastor. So what do? I point him to the local pastor and, say, hey, get in touch with him. But here's my number. You can always call me. And so he unburdens his soul, and I give him words of advice and forgiveness. It is the way of this world. And the conversations we have about why that is and what we can do to fix it go on forever and ever. But it is the way of this world, and God in his sovereignty, one way or another, uses the pain and the evil and the trauma and all the bad things of this world to create glory. If you've never read C.S. Lewis's sermon, The Weight of Glory, you must read it. Because in a strange way, the glory produced by the pain of this world somehow creates something that could not have been created without the pain. And I'm not going to get into the game of weighing balances and justifying and saying this exonerates that or justifies this. We cannot do that math as human beings. It cannot be done. at least not by us. But I think, and so what we're forced to do is to trust God, and we're forced to trust God with everything. We don't have any other options. It's who we are, it's where we are, it's how we must live. I know I've gone on long enough. These are supposed to be little short intros. So, yeah, Michael's talk. Again, just when we thought it was safe to go back in the water, Michael gives us this. So, check it out if you haven't heard it yet. Let me know what you think in the comments.
I am very pleased to introduce to you my friend, Michael Martin. Michael Martin, come on up. I'm very much looking forward to this.
I'm not saying this conference turned out heavier than I expected, but here we go. I know what you're thinking. Well, that guy's pretty good. But, playing somebody else's guitar is like sleeping with somebody else's wife, so it's... Not that I know what that's like. My wife's going to watch this on YouTube and say, we need to talk. I'm going to switch mics. Now, wow, that's on. I'm really surprised, like I just said, it was a joke, but it's not a joke, that how heavy this conference has been the whole time. The theme of Taking Back is, this is nothing personal, a theme of trauma and brokenness from so many conversations I've had over the course of the last few days. As much joy as there is as well. And I contemplated a lot what I would talk about when Nate invited me some months ago. And I'm surprised nobody said this so far. For now we see as through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know even as I am known, which is from 1 Corinthians 13. That's right after that beautiful hymn to love, but it's an interesting how St. Paul turns from this beautiful hymn to love to, but, it's only through a glass darkly. And this is really, the inability to know another person or to know the will of God. I mean, we've talked to people many times over the course of my life. People say, "I'm just waiting for God to tell me what to do." Okay, yeah, I know what that's like. Still waiting. 62. And what's interesting about this now, Nate mentioned earlier that I recently finished a course on Christian Romanticism that Sherry was actually a part of. And a couple weeks ago, we covered the Duino Elegies by Rainer Maria Rilke, which are an interesting it's a collection of poetry, but there's a darkness to it because he's writing in the early part of the 20th century and contending with the darkness, the spiritual darkness that is modernity and the inability to know. So he's really talking about the glass darkly. And when we were talking about this in the course, I said, I always read these elegies and I think of, being in a jar and seeing reality outside of the jar, but you can't touch it. But you could see, it's there. And the presence of God, if it starts off, the first line of the elegies, if you don't know, it's probably the more powerful lines of 20th century poetry. Who, if I cried out, would hear me among the angels' hierarchies? And even if one of them pressed me suddenly against his heart, I would be consumed in that overwhelming existence. For beauty is nothing but the beginning of terror, which we still are just able to endure. And we are so awed because it serenely disdains to annihilate us. Every angel is terrifying. And that's, where do you go from there, right? And this is, I was so thinking of trauma. Trauma is not unknown to me. So, for instance, I don't want to get all weepy and therapy-like, but when I was 15 years old, my father, this was 1970s, in Detroit, which was not a great place to live in the 1970s. And my father, after years of unemployment, not just due to, economic circumstances, and slipped into alcoholism and then tried to commit suicide. And here, thank you, Freud, on my bed. And my mother was at work, and my sister called me to come, and she knew something was wrong, but she didn't know what to do. So she called me. I was at my friend's house, and this is before cell phones, right? So she was lucky to catch me. And I went home, and I found him. I remember tying tourniquets of green socks. Oh my gosh, I don't know what that means. Around his wrist, because he tried to cut his wrist, but he lived. He was a failed attempt, and he actually, after that, it took time, but he lived a life of value in love. I mean, he was always a loving person, but life breaks people, and it broke him, and I think he was probably also, speaking of trauma, dealing with the trauma of losing his own father at 15. So, that generational trauma came to me when I was 15, and I'm hoping I didn't screw my boys up when they were 15. But it didn't. And here's but wait, there's more. So then, when I was 18, a girl I had been in love with, but I'd been friends with her since second grade, committed suicide, and she was 19, I was 18. It was just after I graduated from high school, and my mother went to the funeral home, and I've never seen my mother so distraught. She came home, and she was just just falling apart. And unfortunately, I was not allowed to go to the funeral, nor were any of her other old boyfriends, because her father was blaming us for her death. And a couple years later, I had a dream where I saw her. It was almost some room like this. It was in this room. No, it was a room like a tunnel, like a pole barn, kind of a long building, and there were all these like souls going past, and she was behind them all, like a foot higher. And the rest of the souls were gray, but she was kind of light. And this is how dumb I was, 21 or something. I said, her name was Lisa. I said, Lisa, what's the difference between Jesus and Krishna? Because I had a lot of friends who were Hare Krishnas. And she laughed, and I woke up. And then, this is the story of my spiritual life right there. And then, when I was 33, my dearest uncle, my Uncle Kevin, who taught me how to play the guitar, actually, also committed suicide. Which I walked in the door, and my wife didn't say anything. I didn't think I was going to cry. But my wife walked in the door from work. I was a Waldorf teacher at the time, and my wife just looked at me and said, "It's the curse of Michael Martin." And she told me what happened. It destroyed me. But I think the thing is, I've heard the stories this weekend that this is not, this is common. And I don't think, if any, especially what happened when I was a teenager, if those things hadn't happened, there is no way, I don't think, I would have looked for answers. And I looked for answers through a lot of different places. I think that's probably what I was interested, because back in those days, in the early 1980s, Detroit, Hare Krishnas were all over the place. And they would always hand out copies of the Bhagavad Gita. And I like talking to these people. They're super nice. And that's why I started thinking, kind of an investigation into comparative religion. And I was not, because my GPA from high school was like 1.6 or something, and that was just because they wanted me to get the hell out of the place. That was because they inflated my grades, right? I had no intention to go to college. I hated school so much. And what happens when you graduate from college with that GPA and you hate school, what God does is He makes you go to school for the rest of your life, which is what happened to me. But, I start wondering, and eventually I made my way back to the Catholic Church, and I made my way out again. But recently, you've heard the story, but those kinds. But the thing is, so here's the thing: is recently my 23-year-old son moved back. He was living with his girlfriend, and when he came home, and he was kind of brokenhearted, as you can imagine. And I said, I never got the impression that you could get to know this girl, because was she on medication? And she was on different kinds of medication for antipsychotics or antidepressants or something like this. And I said, well, why is she on all that stuff? She's only 22. He said, well, because her friend committed suicide when she was 17. And looking back, I think, had that happened had those drugs been available when I was 18, I'm sure my parents would have put me right on them. But they didn't. And I consider that a profound blessing, because I wasn't isolated from the pain that those things created. But the pain that those things created turned into music. And they turned into a search for truth, beauty, and goodness, right? And it turned into me having 9 kids. It's right. And you're like, not me. And those are all important things. But the thing is, we live in a culture that insulates us from this stuff, right? We were talking this morning in the estuary, in a way, about the insulation we all have from both birth and death. My own children, most of them were born at home. And I was telling people, I think I caught 2 of them when they came out, but I don't remember. I don't. And I think it was my 2 youngest daughters. And I do remember that when the youngest one, Isabel, when she was born, that I got home from work after my wife called me and come home, there's a baby coming. So I get home and the midwife is not there yet. I said, what do I do? He goes, I don't know, but the baby's coming right now. And the midwife walked in right then. So I don't know if she caught the baby or I did, but I was like, I got this, right? But I was not, so I think I'm profoundly thankful for these experiences of the birth of my children at home with me there. And one time we had to transport to the hospital because my son Gabriel, who's kind of twisted, was twisted and wouldn't come out properly. Plus he weighed 10 pounds. He almost weighed 11 pounds. It was like giving birth to a 5-year-old or something. But you get in contact with birth and death this way. And of course, my work as a farmer, definitely connected to birth and death. I've had to kill animals out of mercy. I've also had to kill animals so we can put them in the freezer. Don't judge me. But I have to take care of life on my farm, and I have to oversee death. On the other hand, I think we also insulate ourselves from death of our loved ones. And somebody was talking in our estuary this morning about, remember during COVID when they wouldn't let you go see your grandparents in the nursing home? And I'm so thankful that right before then, 2019 I think it was, no, it was a little earlier than that, we brought my mother who had dementia out of a nursing home to live with us. And we didn't think she'd last for more than a year or two because while she was in the nursing home, she was in the hospital every 6 months with a broken hip or something, right? So, and then we had her move in with us, and we thought it'll be for a little while. It ended up being 7 years. But had she not been with us during COVID, I can't even imagine what people went through. And I did go through the death of relatives in the inability to go to a funeral, not just the funeral. And I'm sorry, online funerals don't work, right? Just like online divine liturgy doesn't work, right? I mean, just what the heck, people? But the Duino elegies talk about, so there's all these things which kept me connected to what I always call my work, the real, with a capital R, right? They keep you connected to the real. And, I don't know if you know, but I read a lot about sophiology, which people, it's so exotic and esoteric. No. It's just it's knowing what reality is. It's not esoteric, it's not exotic. It's God, nature, family, church. That's what it is, okay? It's not some esoteric construct, which those kinds of things, bother me. Because I think reality is much simpler than we want it to be, So I want to read a couple moments from the Duino elegies, because I think they speak so much to our moment. Even though they were written 100 years ago, they still resonate. In fact, when my son moved home, right before he moved home, I had a copy of the Duino elegies and Rilke's Sonnets to Orpheus, which I gave him. I said, "You probably like this." And he called me the next day, "Dad, this is the most amazing poetry I've ever read." Because he's at the right moment, right? At the threshold of a kind of existential crisis, as I was in my 20s, and most of us are. At some time, we might not know it because we're too busy hanging at the bar or whatever, but we're running away. We're running away from what Heidegger calls the thrownness towards death. We're running away from that. But then we come back, or at least we start to come back, start to make the way home, the way back to our Father's house. And and it turns you into a philosopher, and I think that's why my son said, "You know what? When he moved out, he's like, I'm teaching these people what's what. And then he moves back, he said, you know what? I really miss the woods, and I miss being home, and I think I'm the most like you of all your kids." And my wife is like, "Well, what took him so long?" But we all have to do that. You all have to do that. You have to make it your own, right? But here's one of the quotes from, I think it's the first elegy. Let me double check. Yeah, it's the first one. Being dead is hard work and full of retrieval before one can gradually feel a trace of eternity. Though the living are wrong to believe in the two sharp distinctions which they themselves have created. Angels, they say, don't know whether it is the living they are moving among or the dead. The eternal torrent whirls all ages along in it, through the both realms forever, and their voices are drowned out in its thunderous roar. You might not know this if you know the elegies. They're not the film, which you might know as Wings of Desire, is not based on the elegies, but they use kind of the mood and the language of the elegies, because you have these angels hanging out in Berlin, and it's so painful because they hear the thoughts of people in their despair and their anxiety. It's a Heideggerian as all get out, and there's a scene where a man dies in a motorcycle crash. There's another one where a man commits suicide, and the angels hear their inner dialogue and want to give them comfort, right? But sometimes they can't. And it's the same, that's our situation, right? And it's interesting if you watch that film that you realize, well, maybe you not realize, but what part of the brilliance of the filmmaker, Wim Wenders, is that he puts us, the audience, into the perspective of the angels. So we get the perspective of eternity. So we're privy to this kind of a specialized point of view, which we might not even realize when we watch it. And I remember when I first saw the film at the Detroit Film Theater, probably 1987 or 88. I was 25. So this is right after I left the music business. And I went to see this film, and I was living the life of an ascetic. I'm so ashamed. So I was like, okay, I was basically, I'm not going to eat meat anymore. I'm not drinking coffee. I'm not going to drink alcohol. Okay, maybe I will drink alcohol, right? But I went to see this movie, and there's a scene, if you know the movie, right, where Peter Falk plays one of the angels too, but you don't know he's an angel. He's like, I feel you're there. Reach out. Can you touch my hand, Caballero? And he's telling him, I can't tell you how good it is to be here. Your hands get cold, you rub them together, and it feels fantastic. And coffee, and to smoke, and you do them together, it's wonderful, right? And the first time I get home, I'm like, I knew we had coffee in this house someplace, right? And it called me back from the dead. It really did. It called me back from the dead, and because I realized I was not leading the life of a religious ascetic, I was punishing myself for something. Right? I was a flagellant. It's like those ortho bros, right? Who, right? When it's Lenten, they're like, "Hey man, what'd you do today for fasting?" Right? And you ever see the meme? I've talked about it before. Like a couple people this weekend. The meme, it's like orthodoxy, Christianity, only tougher. Right? It's kind of kill. But that's what I was doing to myself. That is absolutely, and we do that, and I was telling, because I have 9 kids, and God, the worst thing is to watch them punish themselves. You didn't do any, and as Rafe was saying earlier, right? Or no, who was it? It was Chris. Well, it was somebody, I don't know who it was. But it was you. It was Nate. Weren't you the one who said, God remembers our goodness, but not our sins? That's it. But we remember the sins, I always tell people, the story, I tell my kids the story of the prodigal son, right? So, the son's coming home, the father runs out, puts the robe on him, gets the ring on his finger, shoes on his feet, kills the fatted calf, but here's what would happen in our world, right? The father goes out there, well, you can stay in the basement until things get better, but then it's out, right? Which is what people do, right? That's my experience. So let's pull out another line from Rilke. And let's think about this one. This is a good one. And because one of the places we think we get closest to God as Rafe was talking, right, and for me, is finding the beloved, right? And I told this story earlier today. So I wrote this book recently that was published called Mythologies of the Wild of God. And there's a lot of stories about that. But part of the stories of that book, there are a lot of poems about my wife in there. That some I wrote 25 years ago, some I wrote last winter, that are love poems. And she read the first one, because she'd read it when I wrote it 25 years ago. And I told her, hey, this book came out. It's got a bunch of poems about you. You want to read them? And she said, no. I said, why not? It's a gift, you know? It's just, no, I'm not reading it. I don't want to know. I already know. You already got me with the poems from 25, 30 years ago. But here's Rilke, right? Because Rilke was clued into this. Because if we think about the glass darkly, it's not just God, it's the beloved also that we can never know fully. And here's what Rilke says: lovers gratified in each other, I am asking you about us. You hold each other. Where is your proof? Where is your proof? And this is the Heidegger talks about this. How do we find the truth of being? For Heidegger, it's by finally avoiding our confrontation with death, right? So you're like, death is coming, so I think I'm going to be a socialist because I'll throw myself into this cause. And then you burn that one out. And like, actually, you know what? I'm going to be a traddy. I'm a traditionalist Catholic. I'm all in. I'm doing all this stuff. Got a rosary. I'm ready to go. And that burns out. And okay, I'm going to throw myself into this other thing. And for Heidegger, we're just running away from the obvious fact that we are thrown towards death. Now, for him, it doesn't have a religious answer, but I think there's a religious subtext. And the answer to that, once you finally come to terms with that, as we've seen today, is care. Is the care for the other, right? Or care for nature. Care for the creation. And it's an interesting movement, right? And I think if I look through my history of trauma, don't you feel sorry for me? As people, God was saying, okay, this is what we're going to we'll be dealing with in this lifetime, Michael. And but coming to it's hard to come to terms with that when you're 15 or 18 or even 33. But we all have to come to terms with it, right? We were talking in Estuary this morning. There's a wonderful song which I could play it on the guitar. I don't know the words, called "The Old Churchyard." If you've ever heard it, it's "Why weep for me?" Right? There's no reason to weep. And there's a wonderful scene in Shakespeare's Twelfth Night where Feste the clown and Olivia meet, and Olivia's mourning the death of her brother. And he comes up to her, Feste, and she tells her servants, "Take away the fool." And he says, Give me leave to prove you a fool, lady." "Okay, with want of other titles, go ahead." And he says, "Dear lady, why do you weep?" "For my brother, fool. I think his soul is in hell. I know his soul is in heaven. Well, the more a fool to mourn your brother's soul being in heaven. Take away the fool, gentlemen." Right? And that's where that's the fundamental moment. And we do this, right? But take away the fool. God doesn't remember our sins. We do. God couldn't forgive this. Right? You've had that, right? God, this is no. You went to confession about it? Yeah, but it's just, it's really bad. But it's not, right? I can tell when Paul Vanderklay is laughing. Now, Robert Haas, the poet and critic, when he talks about the Rilke's the elegies, he calls them he characterizes him by what he calls brilliant anger, which I see that, but I'm not in full agreement. And he thinks that the answer to that first question, that who among the angels' hierarchies would hear of me if I cried out, Haas's answer is nobody. And I don't think that's Rilke's answer, and it certainly isn't my answer. But it is that impossibility to know, looking through the glass darkly, that is certainly part of the film Wings of Desire, but certainly part of our own experiences. Now, spoiler alert, at the end of Wings of Desire, one of the angels incarnates, and he falls in love. And the most beautiful moment is that when he's been watching this acrobat for the whole movie, and he loves her, and she's suffering, right? She's in existential despair herself. And when they come together, they're at this nightclub where Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, are playing. And just as they come together, and she's coming from behind him, and he turns around, he's got this wine glass. And he turns to her, just hands it to her. And right at the moment where he hands it to her, you hear, yeah. It's really for Nick Cave, but it's really for the beloved, and the lover and the beloved have come together. And that, all creation groaneth for that, right? And that's true. And I think what's important, in what I've learned from the people I talked to this weekend and from being here this weekend, is that despite existential despair, despite brokenness, despite generational trauma, this is what I've been talking about for years in my work, is that there is a splendor that shines through the universe, and we've all felt that too. Right? We've all felt trauma, we've all experienced despair, but we've also felt the glory of God bleeding through the universe, whether it's through creation or usually through many different ways. For me, it came through nature, through music, through poetry, through liturgy, through scripture, and through the experience of love. And but the thing is, we're kind of trained, as Thomas Traherne says, through our lousy education and our lousy contextualization, to not notice that when it happens, or to blow it off, right? Like, one of the questions that was given yesterday to the panelists is, when was the last time you felt the Holy Spirit, right? But I think those are, I don't know, now, I'm like Graham, I'm like, I don't know if I want to name names here. But we have had those, and I think splendor is a beautiful word, which I got from Hans Urs von Balthasar. Splendor is a great way to describe it. It's the glory of the Lord that shines through. You can call that the Holy Spirit, you can call it Sophia, whatever you want to call it. But we've all had that experience. And trying to, as we say many times, trying to give too much of a concrete definition kind of destroys it on the way there. That's why, as Graham so beautifully was exemplifying yesterday, there's a kind of poetic intuition that and I don't only want to talk about left brain, right brain, but there's a kind of poetic intuition that reveals something to us at times, and you don't have to be a poet to get it, but poets can seem to be highly inclined toward it, or at least some poets. And to end, I'm going to teach you a song, because that's how I roll. Now, I don't know if some of you might subscribe to my Substack, The Druid Stares Back. And some people, I've had people, well, he thinks he's a druid. I do not actually think I'm a druid. Actually, I'll tell you the story how that name came along. Now, last time I did one of these estuary things was a year ago, July, in D.C., and one of the other speakers there was, Paul, and myself, and Spencer Clavin. And Spencer, right after that, right around that time, he asked me to write something for, I don't know can't remember the name of the online journal is. Pardon me? He asked me to write something on transhumanism, because I had written something on transhumanism 25 years ago. And So I gave it a title, and I sent it to him, and he gave it a different title. He called it "The Droid Stares Back." And then it was right after that I was studying my Substack, and I said I should get a title for it. What should I call it? And I happened to be doing a different task, and I was like, I got to find that article that I sent to Spencer, and I mistyped droid as druid, and it came back as druid stares back. I'm like, that's kind of catchy. So I'm going to teach. Actually, so the last post I had on the druid stares back was titled "Catholic Neo-Paganism's Greatest Hits," and don't judge me, but and this is a song I listed on there. It's actually a Richard Thompson song. Well, actually, it's Richard Thompson wrote the song, but it was originally recorded by Fairport Convention when I was 6 in 1969. So I'm going to teach you the chorus, and then I'll do the whole song. I'm bringing my cheat sheet of lyrics over here in case I forget how they go. Oh, yes. I'll teach you the chorus. And it goes, meet on the ledge, we're gonna meet on the ledge. Now do that. Meet on the ledge, we're gonna meet on the ledge. When my time is done, When my time is done, I'm gonna see all my friends. So, when my time is gone, I'm gonna see all my friends. Meet on the ledge. We're gonna meet on the ledge. If you really mean it, it all comes on again. Now, I always think of this song. He wrote it when he was 19. God, I hate guys like that. But when I think of this song, I always think of Meet on the Ledge. What does that mean? It's like, and I'm getting older now, you may have noticed. And I do think about this a lot. Like, when it's my time, who am I going to see first? Right? And that's the whole thing, is they're going to be there waiting for you, right? And I think of it, I'm Irish, as a bar, right? And we're going to have one last pint before we go to the big bar in the sky, right? So they're going to wait for you. Pardon me? That's right. So I will have you join me on the choruses. We used to say that come the day we'd all be making songs or finding better words. These ideas never lasted long. The way is up along the road. The air is growing thin. Too many friends who tried were blown off this mountain with the wind. Meet on the ledge, we're gonna meet on the ledge. When my time is up, I'm gonna see all my friends. Meet on the ledge, we're gonna meet on the ledge. If you really mean it, it all comes down again. Now I see I'm all alone, but that's the only way to be. You'll have your chance again, then you can do the work for me. Meet on the ledge, we're gonna meet on the ledge. When my time is up, I'm gonna see all my friends, meet on the ledge. We're gonna meet on the ledge. If you really mean it, it all comes round again. Meet on the ledge. We're gonna meet on the ledge. When time is up, I'm gonna see all my friends. Meet on the ledge. We're gonna meet on the ledge. If you really mean it, it all comes round again. Thank you.
Still I have it. There are moments I conveniently forget that I'm a 40-year-old man. The last vestiges of a ghost long dead. A ghost with a messiah complex. A messiah too lazy to rise or ascend. Happily hurt and hard. A hanger-on or haunting of a time past. A heroic dream of the harrowing of hell. Failure to launch. Cling to a life vest. Treading in spells that linger and last. Mom and Dad, righteous and mad. Daydreamers with ghosts of their own. My memory of them stoic, looking with aims to pretend. Always on the brink of somewhere. Each a child dancing on the fence. On down the river, dreamt in the sunshine. Saturday morning cartoons, the only Sabbath I knew. A disciple of Jim Henson and John Hughes. Worship in cathedrals where the Toys R Us, baptized in ball pits. A clown served the sacrament we eat. More Pepsi and Pizza Hut. Say please. Say cheese. Between Kurt Cobain, a scrambled cable screen, towers tumbling, Super Bowls, and reality TV, the ghost is constitutionally unwilling and intrinsically unable to see and be seen. Searching madly for attention to seek. But you could be anything. Never say never. If you've got nothing nice to say, don't say nothing. Ever. Don't talk to strangers. See what I say. Just do it. You don't listen very well, do you? You don't do very well, do you? You're not looking too good, are you? Keep up. Appearances aren't what they seem. Will you ever grow up? You look like you're stuck. I think you took too much. Echoes the ghost within the host who prays the dead bury their dead and stay buried in a fading dream.
Where are you here?
Oh, there I am. Hey.
Where are you? Where?
Got me?
Oh boy. Yeah. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me.
Come on, man.
Walk with me, walk with me all along this Jesus journey. Walk with me, Lord, walk with me. Yeah.
Walk with my mama.
You walk with my mama.
Walk with me.
Walk with me too.
You walk with my mama.
Yeah.
Walk with me.
And walk with me too.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Jesus journey.
I want Jesus.
Want Jesus.
Walk with me.
Walk with me. Hold my hand, Lord. Hold my hand. Hold my hand, Lord. Hold my hand. All along this Jesus journey. Hold my hand, Lord, and hold my hand.
Walk with Moses.
You walk with Moses.
Walk with me.
Walk with me.
You walk with Moses. Walk with me.
Walk with me.
While I'm home.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Jesus journey.
I want Jesus.
I want Jesus to walk with me.
Oh, I like to go. Say, walk with me, Lord. How y'all doing?
Walk with me. Walk with me.
Lord. Walk with me.
Walk with me.
I'm on my
Yeah, Lord.
I want Jesus
I want Jesus
to walk with me.
to walk with
Go ahead
me. Walk with David, a little shepherd boy.
That's a deal with that woman.
Yeah, you made him a great king. I know David shouted for joy. He walked with David, and he's a little shepherd boy. You made him a great king, and David shouted for joy.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. So walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. All along this Jesus journey. Walk with me, Lord. Walk with me. Gotta walk with me, Lord.
Yeah! That was rocking great, brother.
Oh, yeah.